It was Triumph's answer to the MX-5 before the MX-5 even existed. It was cheap, cheerful, and had just enough attitude. It's also the only car I can think of that was a huge success despite being genuinely dangerous. Let's find out more. By the early 60s, Britain was in full swing. The Beatles were on the rise, miniskirts were causing outrage, and cheap, affordable sports cars were suddenly everywhere. The Spitfire was launched in 1962, and it was designed by Giovanni Michelotti, the same guy who did many Ferraris and Maseratis. And I think you can really see that in this design. The thinking was to keep costs low by using what they already had. But that meant that it was based on a very unlikely candidate, the Herald. Despite that, it was a huge hit. Low, light, at just 711 kilos, and lovely to look at. It was the kind of car that you could afford, you could fix with a spanner, and then thrash on the B roads on the weekends. Of course, it's not all roses. They love to rust. The electrics are about as reliable as a British Rail timetable, and the rear suspension? Let's just say that the early ones had a tendency to surprise you mid-corner, usually into a passing hedge. It inherited the Herald's suspension and running gear. Now this was fine at the front, where it was surprisingly advanced, with unequal length wishbones and rack and pinion steering. At the back, the swing axle setup was absolutely fine for a small, sedately driven saloon. But when pushed hard in a sports car, it became absolutely lethal. The problem is that it has huge changes in camber at the extremes of travel. This can lead to snap oversteer and even if it catches, roll the car over. If you haven't yet tuned in to how different things were in those days, then just consider this. It continued to be sold like this for 8 years, from 1962 until 1970 when it was finally updated. Can you imagine that happening today? Also, in the 60s, this thing was considered relatively well equipped. Why? Because it had wind-down windows and exterior door locks. And the engine? Well, this is a 1972 Mk4 Spitfire, so it has the same engine producing 75 horsepower as the Mk3. It's a pushrod 4-cylinder. The thing is though, in the Mk4 it's slower. A, because the car is heavier, but also because the gearing has been altered to improve economy. So 0 to 60 goes up from 13 seconds to 16. Must be one of the slowest cars I've ever had on the channel. Still though, the Spitfire stayed in production for 18 years, selling over 300,000 units. So it can't be bad, right? Let's find out. That gearbox feels lovely and mechanical, but finding the gears themselves isn't always the easiest thing. Now, I'd forgotten just how crazy the ergonomics are on the Triumphs of this era. I did a GT6 before, which is based on this car. I'm not sure if it was the same, it must have been the same as this, but anyway, sitting in here, initially at least, is a little bit of a task because the pedals are madly offset to the right, and I mean more than in any other car I think I've been in. And initially when I had a look there, I was like, no, there's the brake pedal, where's the clutch? But no, they're all just right in that corner. The steering wheel is so low, getting in and out, you have to go in with your left leg first to make sure it doesn't foul. But once you're in and you switch that engine on, oh, it just sounds so nice. They've got a real sort of deep, woofly sound for a little 4-cylinder engine. And of course, then you're transported back in time by this wonderful interior. It's so simple, there's so little to it. Heating controls, gear stick, light switch, few instruments, indicator, a horn, and the horn, by the way, I love. It's a little sort of stick that comes up at the side, which you just push in, which actually is very well placed because your hand is normally there on the wheel. But right, I said it's probably one of the slowest cars I've ever had on the channel, and we'll see how it feels going down through the gears, or going up through the gears rather. I think there's a little hesitation on this, but let's see how it is. it is just incredibly slow. The point is though, with a classic like this, you don't really need the speed. Already today I'm filming much later than I normally do. There's plenty of traffic on this road. If I was in a normal car, well, not a normal car, if I was in a quick car, I would have already caught up with the traffic. It would have ruined my enjoyment. That's just not what this is about. So they had, I mentioned 75 horsepower, but that was just before they changed measurements. So by modern standards, it has 63 horsepower. They just aren't fast. These cars, the Mk4s, also weighed altogether about 40 kilos more than the earlier cars, which is why they're slower. But you get a lot more comforts in here. The instruments on those cars from the early 60s were in the middle of the dash. They were quite poor. This one also has a quirky little feature, which I'm not sure if it was an official option or if it was put afterwards, but it's a map reading light, which looks really natty. Now, the other thing is that, okay, interior space isn't huge. You're a little bit contorted in here, but they are otherwise fairly practical things. They're super simple to work on. You can see you lift the whole bonnet and you have access not just to the engine, but to the front brakes, to everything. All the mechanicals at the front, very easy to reach. The rear boot has plenty of room, and if you need to put that rear cover up, it's very simple. It doesn't take very long. I think that overdrive was an option, and it's something that if you can, I would advise you get. At the moment I'm at 50 miles an hour, it's doing 3,500 revs. Now that's not a criticism as such, and the engine feels perfectly happy being there, but it does feel like it could do with a fifth gear. Now luckily this car doesn't have the killer suspension. From 1970s they put in a new system which meant that the camber swing was much reduced, so the cars were a lot safer. All the same, it's not something that feels like it wants to be pushed. It doesn't encourage you to drive it fast. It's not sharp, and considering it's a light car, it doesn't feel, the controls aren't that light either. The brakes are quite nice and quite sharp, but we'll see how it feels on this tighter corner here. Keeping up momentum is absolutely key. Of course, 63 horsepower isn't ever going to be particularly taxing on the tyres, but it does feel like it has good grip in the corners, and the suspension is working quite well. Something else that I've noticed is Nick, who has this, always runs it on hot, so that you help cool down the engine, and that heater is particularly effective. So it's a fun little car, but dynamically it is well behind the cars that it was supposed to compete with. That would be the Austin Healey Sprite and the MG Midget. They do handle a lot better. Mind you, they also have unitary construction, whereas this is a body on top of a separate chassis, and I think you can feel that. There's a fair bit of movement in it. It's a car that just works much better if you drive it gently. Production started out in 1962. Those early cars, really up till 1970, the first years of production, which funnily enough is also the most dangerous of the cars, they were the ones that are most sought after. So that would be the Mark 1, Mark 2. They have a different grille, a more period look, and a simpler interior. If you wanted to get one of those, you'd probably be looking at something along the lines of £15,000 to £25,000. With these later cars like this, post-1970, a Mark 4, you can find them for between 5 and 10,000. Now there's a nice sky blue example of a Mark 2, which is up for 18,000. But then also there is a Mark 4 like this one, up for £5,000, which sounds like it is a good candidate for a rolling restoration, because it has, you know, the advert hints that there's a few little improvements that could be made. The latest cars, which are Mark IVs but with the 1500 engine, they tend to be worth a little bit less. Generally, that engine is thought to be rougher and less reliable. And there's a nice red example on for under £5,000, which should be in comparable better condition to the Mark IV we just spoke about. Now, whether I would recommend a Spitfire to you or not, I think depends largely on what you're looking for. If you want a very sharp, agile sports car from this era, then no, I think there are better things out there. But if you want something which is really beautiful to look at, which requires a little bit of skill to drive smoothly, so makes you bond with the car, then I think that a Spitfire is probably for you. Now, have you wondered what would happen if you put a roof on this and then a bigger 6-cylinder engine? It sounds like a recipe for madness, right? Find out. I filmed one a few months ago. Thank you so much, and see you soon.